Can you try speaking?
Our very esteemed guest for our teacher, and we're recording apparently too. So, but please give the utmost respect. He took time out of his very busy day and dealing with an awful time. So, thank you.
Thank you for coming out to this. We need to for event. Would you give a?
Hello. Oh, perfect. Thank you all for coming to this teaching and event with Professor Sami Al Arian. I'll just give a few minutes of an introduction to him and generally what this talk will be about, and then we'll give it up to Dr. Al Arian. So, Dr. Sami Al Arian is currently the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. Originally from Palestine, he lived in the US for 4 decades, where he was a tenured academic, prominent speaker, and human rights activist before relocating to Turkey. Dr. Al Arian also founded the Tampa Bay Coalition for Peace and Justice, which focused on the use of secret evidence and other civil rights issues and anti-terrorism effective death penalty act of 1996, which was an act that codified the U.S. government's ability to formally designate youth as terrorists, as long as they were not Americans, and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. As many of you know, and as Dr. Al Arian will talk about, the use of secret evidence was sanctioned by the 1996 Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, which said that information collected for national security purposes shall not be authorized if disclosure would present a risk to the national security of the United States. And as you can imagine, this means that almost all victims of the use of secret evidence have been people of Arab ethnicity and or Muslims who have been unjustly held to this act and who have been subject to large-scale surveillance programs that have impacted the entire generations of U.S. Muslim, Arab, and South Asian communities. Secret evidence is also, unsurprisingly, pervasive within Israeli commercial practices involving Palestinians. Most significantly, Dr. Al Arian is known to be the first professor on the university campus in America to be unjustly fired for his views and activism on Palestine. A firing that has not only violated his conscience rights at the time, but it's also seen to this day as a catastrophic assault on academic freedom. Prior to firing, Dr. Al Arian was also unjustly tried under the Patriot Act for allegedly conspiring to aid in the country's Islamic Jihad, a charge that he had denied. Even though he denied these charges, Dr. Arian was kept in solitary confinement, regularly subjected to strip searches, denied normal visitation rights of his family, and subject to other punitive conditions while incarcerated, conditions that violate international standards on the treatment of prisoners. Following several more years of trial, incarceration, and house arrest, the U.S. government dropped all charges against Dr. Al Arian. And after decades of living in America and as a stateless Palestinian, forced to leave for Turkey, where he resigned in 2009. Before I begin, I want to add that it's incredibly significant that we're having this conversation with Dr. Al Arian, especially at this campus, and as part of your Chicago Solidarity. Chicago claims itself to be a bastion of free speech and academic freedom, yet cases like Dr. Al Arian speak volumes with regard to the way in which universities are tied to broader cultural practices in both the U.S. and Israel. That said, we're happy to have Dr. Al Arian with us today over Zoom, who will speak on the ways that war on terror practices have shifted forces around Palestine and locally and on U.S. campuses, the criminalization of Palestinian activism, the proliferation of secret evidence in both the U.S. and Israeli commercial practices, the history of Palestinian political prisoners around the world, and the making and remaking of legal practices and procedures that unjustly strip people involved in Palestinian activism of their constitutional rights. Give that to Dr. Al Arian. I guess to begin with, Dr. Arian, can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can I start? Yeah.
Yes. So I guess we'll begin with our first question. So you were targeted, and I mentioned this in my introductory remarks, you were targeted for your work on secret evidence in the 1990s. Hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear. I can hear.
As I mentioned earlier, you were targeted for your work on secret evidence in the 1990s. Could you tell us about that and how that relates to your broader life story?
Well, first of all,
I'm so sorry.
you hear that?
Okay.
All right, Dr. Arian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me start by thanking you for the invitation and for giving me the pleasure to address this crowd. I salute you for what you're doing. You're standing up to injustice. You're speaking out on behalf of Gaza, the people of Gaza who have been under a genocidal war now for over 200 years. And for them to see that there are students halfway around the world, particularly in the United States and the country where it is partnering with this genocidal war, is heartening for them. And they really appreciate this show of solidarity and courage. I was born to Palestinian parents who were exiled from Palestine back in 1948, and I was born in exile. I eventually settled in Egypt for my primary and secondary education and came to the United States at the age of 17 in 1975. I spent over almost 4 decades after that, and I left in 2015. Incidentally, the last campus I visited a few weeks before I left the United States was the University of Chicago. This is where my younger son graduated from in 2013, and I had some friends there, and I made a special trip by car to come and give a farewell to my friends in Chicago. So I really appreciate what you're doing in this very important institution. During my time in the United States, particularly in the 70s and 80s and a part of the 90s, there were very little activism on campus when we talk about Palestine. The Zionist narrative was the one dominant, not only in the media, but also in society. It was not easy to talk about Palestine. I remember my first public lecture was at the University of Michigan back in 1982, right before, not after, but right before the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And certainly that invasion of that year, which was very similar to what we're seeing today. This time we're passing 200 days. During the 1982 invasion, there was no Hamas, certainly no Islamic Jihad, none of these groups. There were different kind of groups. And these groups, the Israeli Zionist government waged a war in order to ethnically cleanse them also from Lebanon, because that's where they existed. And there was about 78 days of continuous bombardment. Between 17,000 and 19,000 people were killed that summer. Same scenario, different actors. The United States was again the dishonest broker in that situation, and they insisted to empty out, to exile the Palestinians that existed at the time, the fighters, the men. And after they evacuated to 9 different Arab countries, they allowed a militia to go into Palestinian camps and massacre anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 unarmed civilians, mostly women and children, old people. Same picture, same atrocities that took place. The difference is that we did not see this 24/7 like we're seeing it today. It was only shown on TV during the 6:30 news hour for about a few minutes. And we would hear about it and see photos. And of course, today, the situation is different. But during the course of my presence in the United States, a Palestinian activism was growing. And I think particularly after 1982, I established an organization in 1981 trying to address this issue, which was later on, many decades later, closed down by the government. I established another one in 1988. And both of these organizations, along with others, we were trying to advocate for the Palestinian cause. I personally gone to dozens and dozens of US campuses around the country trying to talk about this issue. And it was not very popular. We will always have Zionist organizations or Zionist campaign against us. And this became even more brutal in terms of its intensity after 9/11. I remember the first conference of the student, I think it was the Student Justice for Palestine. It was due 2002 at the University of California in Berkeley. And there was very intense opposition to that conference. Same thing happened that year when I attended the University of Michigan. They would even try to bar me from speaking, and other universities, Villanova and others. The point I'm trying to make is that the opposition to the Palestinian narrative, to what the Palestinians represent in this struggle, has been, the Zionist forces have been trying to mute them, to silence them for a long time. They not necessarily that they were able to do that every time, but the narrative overall was always being attacked with the common accusations, as you see today, anti-Semitic, supporting violence, and so on and so forth. Now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, the United States became the unipolar, the greatest or the most powerful country in the world. And they were looking for a new enemy. And interestingly enough, the Zionists, and I have that documented because I lived that era, in the late 80s, early 90s, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, as that transition was taking place, they tried to find a new enemy. And they tried to find that new enemy with those who were either pro-Palestine or those who represented Islamic point of view. In other words, Muslim activists, Palestinian activists, Arab activists became the new target. And that was taking place not only on campuses, but throughout society. By 1996, those who were opposing the Oslo process, the process by which the official Palestinian leadership recognized the Zionist regime on 78% of historical Palestine, hoping that somehow there will be a state of Palestine on 22%, which never happened. Those who opposed the Oslo Accords and those who became the voice of the Palestinian liberation or Palestinian struggle against the Zionist occupation, they will become targets. By 1996, there was a law that passed Congress. It was called the IRA, Anti-Terrorism Law, two of them, one with immigration, one the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. The government started a program by which they were arresting such individuals and putting them behind bars. Mostly, all actually were immigrants. And this was prelude to start this practice and making sure it becomes a norm, and then they can move in to other targets. The individuals who were arrested would mostly be accused, but they have no idea what the accusation is. The government will go behind closed door, present some kind of evidence to the judge. This was in immigration. This was taking place in immigration courts. And the defendant and his lawyers would have no idea what the evidence is. Sometimes it was even newspaper clippings. And then the judge would come out and ask the defender, the accused, the person who is incarcerated, if he can defend himself. And of course, there's no way he can do that without knowing what the charges or what the evidence is against him. And in all cases, these people were denied bail and held behind bar. We call that the use of secret evidence. So we started a campaign. That campaign had many phases, and there's a lot to learn from this campaign, which I think would be very instructive to what you're doing. We had an education campaign in which we went and to educate the public in many public spaces across campuses, churches, mosques, community centers. And we tried to tell people what that meant to American cherished values, to the First Amendment, to other kind due process, to other kinds of things that people were taking for granted. Eventually, we went also to the media, and we started visiting many newspapers, editorial boards, telling them about this practice. Within about 3 years, we were able to get almost 50 editorials and over 200 featured stories. Our next phase was to build coalitions. And we were able to build a coalition within Tampa Bay. This is the city where I used to live, and also nationwide. There was a community organization that will get under it those people who were active in public issues. It was called HOPE, Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality. We joined them and we started talking about this issue until it became an issue very well known to a large segment of the American public. We also established a national coalition. That coalition had at one point about 40 organizations, and these organizations came together. They were very diverse from different backgrounds. Some of them were faith-based, some of them were social justice and action type organizations. And we started a campaign politically after we were done with our public campaign, and we started also a legal campaign to free these people, and we started a media campaign as well as a political campaign. The political campaign meant that we have to go and lobby Congress, and we started getting certain members in Congress to take a position against the use of secret evidence. I personally contacted many of them. We were able to get 129 members after we introduced a bill in Congress called Secret Evidence Repeal Act. Without going into too much details, we were able to get that legislation past the Judiciary Committee, and we were on the cusp of getting it passed in Congress, but we ran out of time by the end of the 2000 legislative session. But the point is that this issue became a national issue, and it became very well known. And let me just tell you about a victory here, is because when we were able to get a hearing in Congress on this issue, we had 4 members on one side representing 2 victims of secret evidence, in addition to the ACLU legal director and a constitutional lawyer. On the other side of the issue, there were American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, ADL, and a racist Islamophobe journalist. In other words, we had the whole Zionist lobby on one hand, and we were on the other. And we were able to get it past Congress, or rather the Judiciary Committee, by the vote of 26-2. So it was a great victory, but it was a small victory. We were not able to get it past the whole Congress. As I said, we ran out of time. But the point is, with dedication, you try your best. Now, social change in the United States comes through 2 forms. One form is from top down, and the other form is from the bottom up. The top-down approach usually comes because they're trying to stop the bottom-up approach, which would be more expansive, and it would be more revolutionary in its consequences. And usually you have the elites, those people who control the wealth and power in the United States. They will have certain segments in society and which they basically own the political class. They get their bidding, they get their wishes through the political class. Then it goes into the court system, because the court system in the United States is very narrow, very conservative, and usually it does what the political class wants, and eventually to public opinion, with the media playing a greater role. This is one way to get things done in the United States. But the more important one is the one that has a bottom-up approach, in which case the small number of people who are active on a particular issue, particularly if that issue is touching every part of our lives, they start coordinating, they start their mobilization, organizing, they start to strategize and organize and mobilize and get together the people who believe in the cause. They are willing to pay the price, willing to sacrifice. They get in and they start basically shaking up the system, because the system is not responsive to what they want, to their wishes. And these are issues of in many ways of oppression and justice and injustice. And we saw this in the civil rights era of the 1950s and 60s. We saw it also toward the end of the 1960s when it came to the Vietnam War, a war that was waged on people in Southeast Asia for the benefit of this power class. These kind of efforts, and also we saw it during the apartheid regime in the 1980s, these kind of struggles, in many instances, were led by students. Students are the conscience of any nation. What you are doing today, basically, you are doing it on behalf of the country. Because if the country is blind to issues of justice and injustice, we have to wake up the conscience in order to make sure that we can address these issues. Otherwise, that society will be doomed. What you are doing today on US campuses is speaking up for those who cannot be heard. And particularly when we talk about a process of genocide, over 45,000 Palestinians have been killed with American weapons, American funds, American political support, and American protection. Even though the Zionist regime are the ones perpetrating this, they could not have done it without the support of the United States. The United States is a willing partner. They have been part and parcel of this genocide. And for the people to see this and remain silent, that means they are complicit in this crime. Therefore, what the students are doing across US campuses is speaking up for the conscience of America. They're telling them what you're doing in our name is unacceptable, and we will not go back until this genocide, until this injustice is done with. And for that, I'm very grateful. Just let me say about secret evidence also, because I was leading this effort during the late 90s, early 2000. I was targeted also, not only on that front, but also for my Palestinian activism. So after 9/11, people were taking advantage, particularly Zionists who have said so openly. I was targeted, and as a tenure professor, I could not be fired. The president of the university I was associated with, she was under tremendous pressure, not to say that she was Zionist herself. She had her own charity in Israel, and she tried to fire me, and she was unable to do that because simply the system would not allow her to fire a tenure professor who was professional in his job, and he had done nothing on campus that would allow her to fire me. Yet she committed to firing me under tremendous political pressure. And eventually she was threatened by an association that defends university professors that unless I am reinstated back in the fall of 2002, they would be blacklisted. When she couldn't do that, she asked the government to start an investigation. That was done openly. And eventually, when nothing happened, she offered me $1 million to resign. I said, give it to me in writing. She went to the board chairman, the university board chairman, these people who represent the wealthy and powerful class. He said, over my dead body, I'm not gonna allow you to pay $1 million to somebody that I've been calling a terrorist. And therefore, he went to the governor of the state at the time, Jeb Bush, who was the brother of the president, and they started, and the investigation just speeded up. I saw this all during my trial, and therefore I was charged. And I saw also that they were following and trying to monitor every aspect of my work against secret evidence and on Palestine. Of course, the jury, after 3 years, they could not try me for 3 years under solitary confinement until they got to the trial. And that year, when I was tried, I was arrested in 2003, tried in 2005. It was the longest trial, continuous trial from start to end. I don't think any trial has surpassed 6 months continuously. That was my trial. And after 6 months and about 75 witnesses that the government presented, and with 13 days of deliberation, they could not convict on a single charge. They were shocked. They brought in several other people in order to charge conspiracy. Some of these people were outright found not guilty. In my case, 2 of the jurors out of the 12, when some charges were left out, they felt uneasy and therefore they refused to deliberate. And the judge did something very unethical at the time. A day before he ended the deliberation, he saw the partial verdicts, and all of them, we're talking about over 100 charges at the time, the overwhelming majority of them were found not guilty, not a single guilty verdict. So what he did is that he declared a mistrial, even though we had 4 alternates in the building. He should have replaced these 2 jurors. Nevertheless, there was not a single guilty verdict. And I think that tells a lot about the nature of the case. It was a pure political case that the government put together in order to silence me, and in order basically to make an example out of me for those who would like to be active or try to start associating with powerful people in government, which was my case. So just to end on this, I just want to say that any work that has to do with confronting power, any person who stand up and start to speak on behalf of the people, they could be targeted. And this targeting, am I there? Did I lose people?
Yes, you're here.
Oh, okay.
No, you're here.
Okay, I'm sorry, I am not seeing you. All right. So any person who stands up to power and who tries to speak truth to power, it is a good chance that they will be targeted. And what happens here is that you have to make a decision whether the cause that you are standing up to defend, the people that you are speaking on behalf of, that they are worthy of your sacrifice. I'm not asking that you commit suicide or a career suicide or take unnecessary risks. You should be very smart about picking your battles and about speaking out, and the rhetoric, the words you use, and the enemies that you confront, and not to be provoked, and not to do some stupid stuff that some people sometimes unnecessarily get themselves into. But it's very important that you stand up on principles, that you don't compromise your principles, and that you stand up for the principles you hold dear. And to do that, sometimes you may have to pay a price. But that is something that is honorable. That is not something to be ashamed of. And I believe what you're doing today across the US, these university students are very commendable. And these are the type of stands that people, years from now, they will be pointing to that this was a momentous moment. This was a pivotal moment when a few thousand students were able to stand up for an issue that the whole society has forsaken, and that we can make a correction instead of having this blot of this crime registered against our society. So just to sum up about this, I had to face what was coming to me. I did not wish it on myself, but at the end, I have to stand up what I thought was the right thing. And thank God that even though the US got hundreds and hundreds of people behind bars after 9/11, the overwhelming majority of these charges were bogus. They were targeted individuals. In many parts, the evidence against these people was manufactured. But I was fortunate enough to beat the government not once, but twice, because they tried after I made a deal with them, so I don't have to put my family through another. It was a nonsensical situation, but it would have spared my family another trial because of these charges that were not adjudicated. And at the time, we had to, I'm sorry, I gotta do the charging. 1 second. All right, so just to finish up this question, sometimes you have to make a decision about the causes you cherish and you're willing to sacrifice for. I did make my choice, and I'm happy that I did not back down in the front of the overwhelming challenges I had to put through, and I'm very fortunate to have been able to get out of this situation.
Hello. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Al Arian, for answering that. I think in the time that we have remaining, we'll go through a couple more questions. But the next question that I wanted to ask you, and you spoke a little bit about this. So I don't know if you can see, but our solidarity encampment at Chicago is going very strong. There are so many students out here. And you spoke a bit about how students should be engaging with how students should be active, how they should be engaging with what's going on in Gaza, and how they should be mobilizing on campuses. And so I was just wondering, what should we as students know in order to bring to light the ways in which Palestinians have been incriminated and are being incriminated, and the kinds of legal and carceral practices that sustain the criminalizations of Palestinians? How can we sort of continue to bring that to light in a way that is effective as part of our solidarity encampment over the next few days?
Well, we have to understand that you are standing up against an overwhelming foe. I mean, the Zionist lobby and the Zionist entrenched interests in America are very, very strong. And therefore, you should expect all kinds of intimidation, not to speak that there is actually a whole ministry in Israel devoted to fighting you guys. It's called the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. It was established over a decade ago in order to confront those who are willing to stand up to the Zionist movement around the world. And therefore, you have all these kind of things that came out in the past decade or so, the Canary Mission and these charges of anti-Semitism and charging people on campus, trying to go after people on social media, and try to have all these trolls on social media and try to target BDS movement around the country in legislation, in politics, throughout the university admissions. So this is a whole campaign that has been targeting Palestinian or people who advocate for Palestine in a way that will make them exhausted and just give up the fight. So you have to be very patient. You have to have perseverance and also work in a strategic way rather than in an emotional, tactical way. So knowing what, the enemy, the nature of the enemy, the nature of the fight, you pick your battles in a way that you can accumulate small wins. We're not going to change the world overnight. So you go for a small win after small win after small win. You try to advocate and talk to the people one person at a time, convert them one person at a time. This is not a religious issue. Let me repeat. This is not a religious issue. We're not fighting Jews. We're not fighting people because of their faith or ethnicity or whatever else a person may differ with. We're fighting aggression. We're fighting a settler, colonialist, supremacist, racist, aggressive regime. That's what we're against. So let's not come down and be. What they're trying to do basically is to try to deviate, try to makes us get these battles that will occupy our time, so that we do not focus on the real problem. The real problem is this: the Palestinian people have been aggressed upon. There was a movement that descended on them because of whatever happens to the Jewish communities in Europe. They came under the banner of a Zionist national liberation movement in order to replace some people with others. They wanted and were able successfully to replace almost 80% of the land they occupied in 1948 with Jews, mostly from Europe at the time, and then they imported other Jews from different parts of the world. And they tried to replace the Palestinians. And they don't want you to go back and discuss the origin, the origin of this problem. They think that this started on October the 7th. The people in Gaza, 80% of them are descendants of those people who were displaced and dispossessed back in 1948. They have not been able to go back because Israel is not allowing them to go back, and they're not going to forget that this is the land that they came from and they want to go back to. So unless there is a resolution that will resolve this problem, there will always be a problem, and that this problem needs to be resolved. So all this talk nonsense about terrorism and about all these things, that is just for you. They distort the facts and they try to deviate from what the real issues are. They don't want you to talk about the real problem. The real problem is that a crime has been committed on the Palestinian people, and that crime has never been addressed. And there are people who are benefiting from this. This is not about Jews. This is about Palestinians. Europeans wanted to resolve their Jewish problem. They had problems with Jews. I don't have a problem with Jews. My problem is with aggression. And that aggression came in the form of the Zionist movement. They took over my family's houses and towns and cities. All my grandfather and grandmother, 3 of them, were buried outside Palestine. My parents were buried outside Palestine. And their dream was that they wanted to go back to Palestine. And I have the same dream. And I believe my children have the same. So we're not going to give up. And Palestinians overwhelmingly are not going to give up. What you have today is an apartheid type regime in Palestine. They had the opportunity, the historic opportunity, when the Palestinian official leadership offered them 78% of the land, but no, they wanted to get the whole thing and displace the Palestinians. So we are in a situation now that the only solution to this is to dismantle this racist, supremacist regime. We're not talking about displacing Jews. We're talking about changing the system in the same way the apartheid regime in South Africa was changed. So we need to focus on the real issues and focus on the real objective and goal, and not get bogged down with semantics, rhetorics, and what they want you to be busy with so that you forget what the real issue is about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arian. And I think as like a final question, so one thing that we're sort of thinking about, and you mentioned this in the answer to the first question, is about Israeli commercial and legal practices. And I think one thing that we've seen is that sort of the effects of counterterrorism legislation and incarceration of Muslims and Palestinians globally is quite different today, or it may seem like that, than it was 20 years ago. But your own case shows us that many of these institutions and practices were deeply rooted in the current world order prior to 9/11 itself. So how do you think counterterrorism practices have shifted in the past few years, and how do you think they might reinvent themselves in the aftermath of October 7th?
Well, unfortunately, after 9/11, law enforcement agencies, security-based agencies have transformed the United States into basically a national security state. I don't envy the environment you're living in or the environment you're growing up into. It's really very frustrating to know that how much rights you have you've lost and about to lose. Every aspect of your life now is being recorded by the government, and you could be basically at risk at any part of your life. So I really appreciate the risk you're taking, because you're standing up, I hope, for a better future for this country. The counterterrorism laws have transformed fundamentally this society. We have to understand also that standing up for Palestine is going to be standing up for all issues of justice around the world. I don't think there is a single issue today that unites the 4 corners of the world like Palestine does. When we talk about the fight against, or the struggle against, imperialism, exploitation, multinational greed, and all that, Palestine represents all that. You can't find a single issue that could mobilize the millions in all capitals around the world like Palestine does. So we could use Palestine basically as the issue that can unite all the forces who are trying to make this world a better world. The other side is going to use the monopoly of state violence against us. They try to pass laws because they basically own the political class in order to pass laws and legislation to make sure that we are restricted in our struggle and our resistance to this attempt of hegemony, of control, of state control over people in all aspects, economic aspects, social aspects, cultural aspects, and what other things they can control us with. So knowing this, that means you have to be prepared, as I said earlier, that you pick your fights in order to win, accumulate small fights, and start bringing people together. We need to build alliances, coalitions, because they can defeat us if we are small in numbers and divided and fragmented. It will be very difficult for them to win if we are united and we know how to fight back. Let me tell you about a story that happened in 1970, and I'm sure you read about it, the Kent State University massacre. There were only 400 students, and they overplayed their hand. They killed 4 student protesters. 2 of them actually were not protesters, they were just there watching, and they wounded 9. In the next few weeks, 4 million American students walked out of the universities. That event actually galvanized the whole country, and eventually that movement was so powerful that the government had no recourse but to give up and withdraw from Vietnam. The point I'm trying to make here is that we have to start a movement in the US. This cannot stop, because I know you have final exams in the next few weeks, and then you have a summer. We don't want this effort, this mobilization to fizzle. We want it to continue, and for that, we need to come together, all campuses, strategize, organize, mobilize, and continue the fight. And there will be some challenges. Some of the students would be dismissed, suspended, their scholarship taken away. We have to come together and make sure we support each other. And we have to build this movement until victory. And I see victory. I can tell you this now. I see that this Zionist regime is actually shaking. It is shaking because it knows that once this movement takes off, once we are able to fulfill our demands, just imagine if we can take out the divestment part of it. That means once the students do that through the universities, and this is what happened with South Africa. The first one to divest was university in 1978. But within 10 years, 156 universities divested, and soon after, the whole system collapsed. You are in the right course. Just continue the course. Don't be provoked. Don't go for small fights. Look at the bigger struggle. Continue that struggle. Educate people. Organize yourselves. Make alliances. And one day we will see victory together.
Free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine, free, free Palestine. Thank you so much, Dr. Al Arian, for those very, very moving words. That will conclude the end of this talk and teach-in. Inshallah, we see a free Palestine one day, very, very soon. So thank you once again. We can give it up again for Dr. Al Arian.
Thank you.